Well, welcome to another episode of the Warriors Walk. My name is Todd, and I got my buddy Keith here. And today we're going to talk about the power of community and accountability as far as having that brotherhood and having someone to walk with in our Christian walk. And so stay tuned.
Now, Todd, you were Navy SEAL for how many years?
26.
26 years. And so inevitably, SEALs are known now. You know, when you first joined the SEALs, they weren't really, there wasn't a lot out there that you knew about. But now that, SEALs are becoming, they've become very well documented and everything, there's a very strong brotherhood within that community. In fact, I always, people that know me and know you, they asked me like, "Oh, do you think Pastor Todd knows so and so? I met this guy that was a Navy SEAL. Maybe they know each other." Like, everybody just assumes that it's a very tight knit community, which it is based on your experience, of course. And so we wanted to do an episode where we kind of parallel the aspect of knowing that you're a team of people, like and doing and accomplishing hard things in the military, and the parallels between walking with a community of believers in a support system in your spiritual walk as well. And so how, successful believers often have a team of people, that they're surrounded to. We're meant to do life together and live in that accountability and community of the Christian faith. And so as we dive into this topic, let's eliminate some assumptions, because I think we have movies like Jason Bourne, or The Bourne Identity. We have Rambo, back in the 80s. And we see that as like a one-man team as far as like really, just going in guns a-blazing, accomplishing all this stuff. But was that your experience in the SEALs?
Not at all. Yeah. And historically, there have been occasions where one person has done some phenomenal, heroic deeds. So, for sure. But that's not the standard. That's not what you're training to do. You're training to work as a team. And that's, it's even in our nomenclature, right? SEAL teams, and, we have this, like this shirt says, "Long live the Brotherhood," right? That's what those letters stand for. And it is this ideal, like it is a family, like, and you need each other. Yeah. And I could spend hours talking about how needy I was, and I needed teammates to help me all the time.
And I'm curious to know, because, I'm sure this is a question you get too, is like how, when you talk about a Navy SEAL team, because there's how many teams total? I know there's.
That's a good question. It's easier for me just to say there's the odd number teams are on the East Coast, and then the even number teams are on the West Coast. And so, and from there, we have, out in Hawaii, we have our submersibles. And so that's a specialty team in itself. Yeah. So a lot of teams, and then, you got a lot of shooters, won't throw down numbers and stuff like that. But, for every team, you got support too. And so
yeah.
you have a lot
and that
of
was what I was kind of getting at
support.
is, to show like it's not just the people that are literally on the team, so to speak, but for every, teammate that you have in the SEALs, there's a whole support system behind that too, with intelligence and people that outfit the different needs of each team. So,
Sure.
are you allowed to share any numbers as far as like for every one person that's in the battle or whatever, there's so many other people that supporting them, or is that,
accurately,
that's not clear cut?
I don't know if I accurately could tell you what the ratio is, but at some point I would say it felt like at least half the team was support. And so, that's a significant number. So I don't know, just pick an arbitrary number, say 200. There are 200 bodies at a SEAL team, 100 of them were support. And then when you break down that 100, of those 100, maybe only half are, actual shooters, and some of them getting long in the tooth or doing other roles. And so, in the end, like, it really does take a lot of people to equip and train up a group before they go overseas.
Yep. And one of the biggest things you've shared with me about your experience with the teams and now being, a leader of our staff at our church here at Prince William, is some of the qualities that you look for in people that you work with or that serve underneath you. And so what were some of the top qualities that you look for in a teammate if you're recruiting someone, or if you're promoting someone? What were some of the character qualities that they would need to have?
Yeah, there's so many. Humility is a big one, because you could show up as a SEAL and you could have great skills, but if you don't have a humble spirit, nobody's going to teach you the extra stuff that you don't learn in a book. And really, I would say the same in ministry, right? Like, if we have someone who's a know-it-all, it's like, do we really want to invest in this person? Like, they have so much to learn, including humility. And so that's one aspect. But then swing it the other way. There is this expectation that everybody is to be a pro. And I think being a pro alleviates a lot of the other gray area in that you don't have to have someone watching you to perform. You don't have to have someone motivate you to work out. It's nice to have someone to motivate you to work out, but when you understand the responsibility of your job and what that carries, at the end of the day, if I need to make sure you come home to your wife and your 4 boys, that means I need to be physically fit so that I can throw you over my shoulder and I can carry you a long distance, right? So there's all these things that are implied. Be a pro means doing that.
Yep.
It means going to the range to shoot. It means cleaning my weapon. No one needs to tell me to clean my weapon after I shoot it. It's all these things, right? So humility and being a professional are 2 big ones. And then it's even in our ethos, and I don't know what year they came out with our ethos, but it didn't exist on paper when I first came in. But there is this ideal of trust being a big, big deal, right? And so much so that you could take somebody and say they have 80% ability in whatever field, but the expectation is that you have 100% trust with them, because you could perform at 100 on any. Let's say you're, the best shooter in the world, but only 70% of the time I can trust you. Well, then we don't want you, because we need to trust you 100% of the time. So trust, I think, fold that in between the humility and the being a pro. I think those 3 would do well, not only for the SEAL teams but also for ministry.
Yeah. And I think with with what we know, like just general public about team, about SEAL teams, they have camaraderie. Like they have to have each other's back. They have to have trust within the team. They have to have the skill, of course. Like these are the best of the best when it comes to certain skills. And what I was fascinated by when I first met you, it was right before you were about to retire, and I got invited to your retirement party, and you had mentioned that there were certain people that you would hire, for specialty skills like that weren't military, and I didn't know all the details, and I'm guessing you probably can't share all of them. But what was fascinating just during your retirement party was to look around and see and try to guess who wasn't military, but they hired for a special skill, and then to imagine what those special skills would be. I think that'd be kind of a cool. So yeah, there was a few people that I'm like, I don't know, what they do, but they're in the room of your retirement, so you had to have known them somehow, So that was a pretty fascinating aspect of seeing how the teams. You have people that are in the team, of course, but then there's specialty skills, outside there that are you able to share any of the special skills that you could hire, or is it?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
They're special, still are.
Good stuff. Yeah. Well, we don't want to share that publicly then, but no, a role that really plays into your effectiveness as a team in the military, I'm sure, is the camaraderie. Just to to have that trust and that the ability to get along well. And so, how does the camaraderie within the SEAL teams play? Like, what role does it play in maintaining the morale of the unit?
I would say it has a lot to do with morale. And every platoon, whatever the platoon size is today, but let's say you got 16 guys. I mean, usually a couple of them are almost undesignated, but they're in charge of morale. Like you have a couple guys that just can get people pumped up. And it doesn't necessarily match rank and titles, but you have those guys that are just the morale boosters, and you need them. And so, and that's what I tried to encourage my son. I tried to be a morale booster myself, but I told my son, who serves, I said, listen, let's just take temperature for an example. Everybody knows it's hot. So don't be the guy complaining that it's hot. Like if it's 150 and you're sweating buckets and every time you drink a liter of water, it just oozes out of your body, we know it's hot. So don't be that guy crying about the heat. Conversely, don't be that guy crying about the cold. Like everybody knows it's cold, right? Rather be the psycho that's like, digging it and having fun. And then that's going to spur people on to thrive in those environments. And so that's what I try to do. Certainly there's days where, and I don't like the heat, but I've performed, in a lot of places where it was super hot and I just had to bite my lip, and all right, this is really awesome.
And you'll see where I'm going with these questions too. As we tie it back into spiritual aspects. But how does camaraderie and being on a team impact the mission success?
Yeah, I would say it has a lot to do with it. And really, you could almost go back to those attributes that I talked about earlier. As far as I just picked 3, but humility, being a pro, and then the trust factor, knowing that you can trust the people on your team. Is going to boost that brotherhood, and knowing and viewing everyone as more significant than you, like creating that spirit of humility, right? that you would be willing to lay your life down for that person. Like that in itself does an act of humility, right? Because I want to go home to see my wife and kids, but to know that I also would die for you, that's going to boost your morale, knowing like, all right, like, it may be sketchy, but I know that guy would die for me, and so would that guy, which in turn means that you would die for me.
Yeah.
And so and it inevitably, I think, when you look at the humility and you look at the trust, and then being a pro, I would even say there are times on any team, any unit, where guys don't like each other. I mean, sometimes, some of the best discipline that takes place is just a good old fashioned fist fight, right? And they just sort it out, and like they may not be chummy, but they're still going on an op that night. Right. And so when you get a bunch of alpha males together, like you got alpha male problems. And so sometimes you're going to just have to square off and sort it out, and I'm sure, it's not proper in today's military, but there was a time where it certainly was proper. And because they were pros, they could set aside their differences and still operate with a high degree of trust.
Yeah.
So
great. So we see that camaraderie, having a brotherhood, a team around you. It affects morale, it affects your mission success even, just to know that you're working together towards it. What about camaraderie and a brotherhood within the team? How did that mitigate the effects of stress during combat?
A couple different ways. So one, just having people to talk to that experience the same thing, I think is helpful. And again, we talked about this, but one of the best ways to push through post-traumatic stress is just to talk about it, right? What did stress you out? And so for me, one of the most significant things that I experienced overseas was just having to put a bunch of children in body bags. And being a father of 3 small children at the time, that was really hard. And so the more I talked about it and the more I shared it, it lost its power. But when I say it lost its power, it still took 10 years before I could fly and not get sick to my stomach. Like it was that big of a deal. And I think that's where I've learned not to judge people too. Like what may be difficult for one person and it's not difficult for the other doesn't mean it's not difficult.
Yeah.
Like everybody's wired differently. And I think everybody has a max threshold on what they can deal with too. And so when you have people you can communicate with and share, your heartache with, I think even that's comforting. And again, I would say for those who are listening, you don't have to have a bunch of fancy degrees and certifications to be a good listener. It's, do you care about that person? Then just show up and be present and listen.
Yeah.
And I promise you, it will do them a world of good.
Well, and it's interesting you shared that too, just about experiencing hard things. And so that this next question is, how does shared hardship foster a sense of camaraderie and belonging within a team?
Oh yeah. Like you listen to I'll just pick on my own group, but you listen to any SEALs talking, they never talk about like, remember that day when the weather was perfect and nothing went wrong? Like that's just not framework for a good story. Where it's like, remember when we were in that avalanche and you're hanging on the side of the mountain, then your crampons fell off your boots, and then you're hanging with one hand with an ice axe? That was cool. You're like, that was cool.
Yeah.
And so you have those moments, but it does. I mean, I can think of extremely hard things I've done with people. I remember one time getting pinned in a sewer with a couple teammates. It's one thing to deal with poo, right? Let's just be honest. It's a whole nother thing when you're dealing with the enemy's poo.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not cool. And so I was held up in a sewer for a long time. And I was glad I didn't have to suffer alone, right? And then we could make light of it. Like, this is one of the stupidest things we've ever done in our life. Like, I don't know if I'll ever use a sewer again to sneak in somewhere. And so real life stuff, right? Like real poo trouble.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Now, is there like a brotherhood or like a camaraderie? Does it differ between different branches of the military? Or is it just like one and the same? Like if you've been through difficult things, if you've been in combat, like you're all similar?
So it's a good question. I would say, having been involved with a few groups in my military career, I'd say there's similarities. Anybody that goes through something, they feel like, okay, I identify with you. For instance, SEAL training, the guys that go through SEAL training, and I think today collectively it's about 2 years, but they feel like, okay, I know what you went through, so therefore you know what I went through, so we're brothers. But then, like, they used to send us to airborne school, and, like, they're the elite of the elite. And you're like, it was 3 weeks long, and you're like, wait, like, we were just barely getting started. Like, this whole special course is over. But yet, if you went through airborne, you identify with someone else who went through airborne, and you realize neither one of you are dirty, nasty legs, because that's what they called you before you jumped out of a plane. You were a dirty, nasty leg, and now you're airborne. And so you have all these things that you can have in common with people. When I went through Green Beret training, right? Like rather than headbutt with Green Berets overseas, I could QRF and I met fellow classmates and we're serving together. And there's that a level of trust because, hey, you're one of us. You went through our training. And so
And
there's
was that
all those
was that
things.
intentional for sending you through certain trainings to because they knew that you're going to be working with different variety of
So what was
specialists?
explained to me, it's a good question, was it was intentional by people on high, whoever people on high are.
Yeah.
But they did want us to be more fluent in Army. And so SOCOM stood up in 88. And then a few years after that, after Panama, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Bosnia, Kosovo, they rounded up a bunch of us and sent us through different specialties. Mine was 18 Delta. That's the Special Forces Medic program. So you get to do all the other fun things going through Green Beret training, but then you also get PA school jammed down your throat. And so very valuable. It was very difficult, but I also, like some of those guys are still guys I stay in touch with to this day.
Yeah.
So,
And that was the question I was going to ask as you've you transitioned out of the military. Does camaraderie and that brotherhood help veterans transition back into civilian life?
so the classic answer, it depends. You have one group that their job defined them and their whole existence revolved around that role, right? And so they have a more difficult time transitioning, I think, into the civilian world because it's not the same, right? And I think that's where a lot of men and women are suffering today is when they get out, they don't have that same cohesive unit. They don't have, people don't get their jokes. Typically the jokes are a little rougher, and sense of humor is a little skewed because of what you've witnessed. So you have one group that would say has a difficult time transitioning. Other groups, I think, do okay when they realize like it was a job. Like I'm not a SEAL today, right? I couldn't do near the things that I could do once upon a time. And so I don't pretend, And it's almost like I heard someone say it the other day, and I think it was another podcast, and I'd love to give credit to who said it, but I can't remember right now. But it was really it was good, and it was just this ideal of, are you able to just tell stories, or do you have capabilities?
Mm.
And I was like, that's good because I would say a lot of my talking is just story talk
Yeah.
where it does get you back on the mat and say, all right, how do I maintain these capabilities, And so pistol shooting is a great one, right? When you're active duty,
skill.
in a special unit, then you're shooting really hard of a pistol. Don't shoot pistol for a couple years, you're not shooting pistol that well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where, all right, I need to get back out of the range and make sure I can actually shoot my pistol well.
Yeah.
So I want to be careful that, I have capabilities as long as possible and not just stories.
Yeah, that's good. And so how does the military encourage the development of camaraderie among new recruits? So you spent some time training other SEALs as a BUDS instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was a fast way to develop some good brotherhood within new recruits?
Well, I mean, super easy in instructor or student mode. I mean, it's you against them. And so you get them to bond together, and they're just so eager to destroy you and beat you on their own. And so, but we also learned a lot of tips and tricks because they were done to us too. And so you could fracture their morale pretty quickly, and just have them turn on each other. And so,
Yeah.
and that was part of the proving grounds. But ultimately, where you foster that is doing hard things together. Like Hell Week is one of the big things you go through in SEAL training. And so, you certainly don't trust the instructors, and they're out to get you because they are, right? They want you to quit. They're waving hot chocolate in front of you. Like they're trying to lure you to the dark side. Like, I will not quit. And what was surprising, I remember we had this one guy, and I remember his name. I won't say it. I don't want to be slanderous, but this great big old guy that was a force recon, came over, wanted to be a SEAL. And the very first night of Hell Week, and we're talking 2 hours in. So, up until that point, I think 5 or 6 weeks before Hell Week when I went through in the 80s. But like 2 hours is nothing, right? And each day you're getting pounded for 12, 14 hours. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, he was a big, strong guy, and he's bigger than all of us. And I was in the biggest boat crew. And all of a sudden the boat starts shaking, and we're like, it sounds like someone's crying. And he just like dropped the boat, and like we're all like leaning sideways, like, come back. We couldn't hold the boat up without him. They just ran over there and rang the bell. And then, of course, back then, you can't do this today because it's psychologically scarring. The instructors had us all form up and sing Happy Trails. And so meanwhile, you got a guy crying because he just quit. And like we're singing Happy Trails. And then you realize how quickly the sharks turn and and they're just like, beat it. and like he's done. We never saw him again. Like I never saw him ever again. And so, now as an instructor, when I went through, I understand there's a process and they like make sure they're healthy and all that other stuff. But like for us as students, like never saw that guy again ever.
Wow.
And so it's easy when you go through hard things. And again, like I would say all of us in any service, any capacity, even things you and I have done in youth ministry, right? Like when you do hard things together, like that forms, a bond, that's quite a forging event. And so, but as far as instructors, like instructors all day long can just destroy morale, and I'll give one example. I have numerous ones, but this one's pretty benign. I don't think I'll get anyone in trouble, but this was done to me as a student. So I did it when I was an instructor. I love working the midnight to 8 a.m. because there was less adult supervision. You fill in the blanks for the listener.
Get away with more, yeah.
You can get away with more, but one of my favorite evolutions was just to get everybody out by the docks, and I'd have them all jump in and tread water. And I was like, all right, take your boots off, hang them around your neck. They're all like, we could do this all night. I'm like, you probably could, and the water's like in the 50s, so it's chilly. I'm like, all right, as soon as two of you quit, then we'll do something else. They're like, we'll never quit. I'm like, fair enough. And then I just have the lights turned off around the pier. Then I sit up there and then I pour that delicious hot cocoa and the breeze brings it down to them. Yeah. And maybe a hearty class, 10, 15 minutes, they're chanting and stuff. And then you start hearing like, they start, they'll single out a guy. They're like, you're worthless. You need to quit, And the next thing you know, they're just offering them up. It's almost like what's the one Hunger Game thing? Tribute.
Yeah.
Like it's like they're offering up their own tribute.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, a guy comes up and I had him sit beside me. I give him a nice thing of hot cocoa. And I like just need one more. And it's like they're lined up trying to get up that ladder for that hot cocoa. And so that's just one example of like in 15, 20 minutes, people are like, "We'll never quit," to hot cocoa, and it's done.
Wow. Yeah. Now let's transition this to the parallels like in our spiritual walk and how important, being on a spiritual team, having a brotherhood of other people that hold us accountable. So even just walking through some of the things that we talked about with the SEAL teams, how camaraderie and brotherhood play in morale, like even just your motivation to keep going, the mission success. We have a spiritual brotherhood that we need. Mitigating stress during combat, in the spiritual battle, do we have peace as we're walking through with other people? Even just, camaraderie with shared hardship. I mean, talking about walking I think of like Stephen's ministry here at our church that, we're walking through people that are going through difficult times and just how that bonds people together and helps them to help carry that, burden. And so when you think of what you experienced in the Navy SEALs to now being a pastor who is leading people spiritually, what are some things that someone might miss out on spiritually if they try to go at it alone? They just try to Rambo their life through, spiritually speaking.
Yeah, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is you're just missing out if you're not doing life together, right? You and I have studied the 59 one another's, and last time I checked, you don't have to be an English major to figure this out. You can't do the one another's alone.
Yourself, yeah.
Right? And so you got to be with other people. And if we're to live out, the two greatest commands of loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor like ourselves, we need to be involved with other people. And then, the Bible reinforces, over and over, just these great teaching points on there's wisdom in having a great multitude of counselors around us. Every man and woman walking planet Earth has a blind spot. And so the reason it's called a blind spot is you don't see it. And so to have someone gently call it out in your life, say, hey, I've noticed this in your life. And especially if they do it in a tactful, loving way, and then you're humble enough to receive it, it's going to make you better. In the SEAL teams and in most professional units, you get called out hard. Like if you're slacking, like people let you know, whether it's physically, whether it's, performance, they're going to let you know. Like they won't put up with it because it could cost them their life.
Yeah.
So then when you think about again, discipleship and walking alongside another believer, like you're just truly missing out. That's the thing I think Keith and I have landed on the most for those of you listening is you're missing out if you're not in a discipleship relationship with somebody. To have a battle buddy, someone who knows your heart, who can pray for you. For those that are married, it's great to have your spouse know you a certain way. But I would say that there are some things that are healthier for a man to, confess to a man and a woman to confess with a woman and to have that spiritual battle buddy outside of your marriage too. Because a lot of times, people just throw down there, well, I'm married and that's my best friend. That's the only person I need to talk to. And it's like, well, maybe. But maybe, like your wife doesn't want to hear about you morally failing on a regular basis, and maybe it'd be better to talk to a dude. So some of those things too to safeguard your marriage. So just one example of many.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think of like even just the mission success, so there's tons of people that I've talked with over the years that they may have been hurt by someone, in like supposedly a Christian or people that are within the church, and they're like, that's it, I'm done. It's just me and Jesus now. What are some things that that you would, maybe tell that person for advice when it comes to that mentality of like, it's just me and Jesus because of past hurt within church?
Yeah. So one, I would say on behalf of church leaders, I'm sorry, for that hurt. But I'm not surprised because in the end of the day, I mean, there's imperfect people that are working in a church and they're going to mess up. I've hurt feelings, in my 12, 13 years as a pastor now. Like I've made mistakes and none of them were intentional. Like, oh, I can't wait to get up in the morning and hurt your feelings. Yeah. But like sometimes we just make mistakes, right? I think it's important for those leaders to own it. And sometimes, unfortunately, they don't. And you have the tremendous privilege of voting with your feet and moving on. But I would say it's also there's wisdom in confronting them. And if you do it in a loving way, you might actually help that brother or sister grow where they could be more like Jesus. And so, one, you're missing out. If you just bail on the church, like you're missing out on a lot of God's word on what he's commanding you to do. Yeah. So regardless of being hurt, like you're called to be a part of a local church. Mm-hmm. And so the ideal of even worship corporately, like think of any large venue experience you've had. Like I remember studying, they were just talking about like they hooked up people in a big concert with like the conductor and all that. And they played the same music at home and it was like night and day, the differences on what was registering mentally for that person. Like when they listened, they had their best sound speakers and everything. It was not the same as sitting in an orchestra pit, with 1,000 people around. Like the experience was 100-fold more increased for pleasure. And just then you think about corporate worship. Like I can get teary-eyed just listening to a song at home or driving, but then like when I'm worshiping with my brothers and sisters. The other day, we as a staff with our spouses went to the Museum of the Bible for that wonderful concert. That was just different than listening to that same person on my truck radio. Yeah. And so you're missing out corporate worship. There's just some things you can't experience at home, certainly alone. And again, you're missing out on the ability to actually fulfill your role in God's kingdom, and that is to serve. I mean, Mark 10:45, we've shared this verse multiple times, but, Jesus came to serve, not to be served, and he gave his life as a ransom for many. And so if you're going to be a follower of Christ, and that's what this warrior's walk is all about, right? It's calling each other out on the hard stuff. Then you should be serving. Yeah. Otherwise, like, how can you call yourself a follower? And so it's painful, but I believe it's true, and again, Keith and we're trying our best and we fall flat on our face, but we pick each other up and like, let's keep trying. Let's try to be, good teammates. Let's try to be good husbands, try to be good fathers. I'm trying to be a good grandfather. Like we need that encouragement because we are going to fall. We're all going to mess up.
When I think too, like, people that have maybe walked away from church or not as involved or kind of, holding everybody at arm's length because of past hurt, I would say, well, one, like, validate it's painful. Like you can, like, we're not saying that no one has been hurt. But I would just say, to really, make sure that your faith is in the person of Christ, not the people of Christ. And I think that's a big shift that, it's like, has Jesus actually let you down, or was it, people that said that they represent him, which were all imperfect and, and then, and I think, you're missing out on the possibilities of one, your contribution. So other people may need you. So we often think of like what we're getting out of it. And it's like, well, I don't think I'm getting what I need to out of this or whatever. But there's other people that need your gifting and need your past experience to help, in their walk with the Lord as well. And so, so even serving, but also, missing out on that community that helps protect us doctrinally and and walking through, people that care and love us.
Well, I think even, looking at all the churches, we moved around quite a bit in my career, and we benefited so greatly from having all the older saints pour into our children. So even though we weren't near physical grandparents, our kids had 20, 30 sets of grandparents. And one of my favorite memories, I'm thinking about sharing it actually this Sunday in a sermon, but this idea of community and just some of the benefits. Our son, who we were very much helicopter parents, we hovered, we were very protective. But there was this dear old saint, him and his family. His name was Mr. Carl. He's the Cracker Jack guy, we called him. Like in the back of his car, he had just boxes of Cracker Jacks, and he would give them out to the kids. And nothing malicious or weird about it. Like he was just that guy. And so kids loved him. And one Sunday, he asked, like, hey, could your son come home and help me in the garden? And we're like, you know what? Yeah. And we'd been to his house. We know him and we trust him. And so that was a big deal for us, though. Like, here's our 5-year-old. And so this was back, when we had Sunday morning church and Sunday evening church and Wednesday, right? And so 3 times a week type stuff. And so we picked up our son. He was so excited. He was running in the parking lot that Sunday evening. He's like, Mom, Dad, I had so much fun. I picked bikinis with Mr. Carl. And we're looking at, and like Mr. Carl's face was turning bright red. And he's like, zucchinis. And our son, he didn't know the difference apparently. Yeah. And so we're like, but it's those moments like that we cherish today. But just looking back, knowing like this man spoke truth into our son's life as they're in the garden picking bikinis, right? So those are the things that you're missing out when you think you can do this thing called life and Christianity by yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, I think if you've been watching this episode the whole time, I think the main takeaway is you need others and they need you. And I think that's what the commands in the New Testament that we call the one another commands emphasize over and over again. If you're on the fence about joining a local church, of course, make sure that you're committed to one. We can't just be part of the global gym and not work out at the local gym. And so even if you have a membership to the global church, so to speak, of following Christ, you're exercising your faith through the local body of Christ. And I think that's the main takeaway, even from the teams. It's not a lone ranger type of mentality. Like everybody plays a part on the team.
Absolutely.
So you have a survival tip that will come in handy when we're stranded in the middle of nowhere. So what's your survival tip today that has to do with cordage?
Yeah, well, in fact, it is that. It's cordage. So there's cordage, is a fancy word for rope. And prayerfully, you have some good old-fashioned 550 cord, which is military grade. It has 7 strands in the middle, and just wonderful things you can do with it. But I think there's wisdom in learning how to make your own cordage. Now, it may not be as strong as 550 cord, but just a couple examples. My favorite that I used a lot in Alaska was I would use the roots of trees. And so you'd see all these different roots that were maybe this diameter of a pinky. And so I could take those and then I would kind of debride them on a tree limb sticking out, and I'd clean off the bark and everything. But their Kodiak is so wet that it was pliable, and so they weren't breaking on me. And then I would do a technique called the counter twist, which I need to make a video to help explain that. But basically, I could braid that root, and then combining each strand together, I could make a really strong rope. So much so that I could do the bow drill with that type of rope, that cordage. Then the extreme that I did, and I backed myself up with real climbing ropes, is I actually took bull kelp, which is that really big kelp that you see in the ocean sometimes, and it has like a big round head on top of it. And so I took the bull kelp, and I think at the end of the day, I made just shy of 30 meters of rope from it. And so just counter splicing, putting more in there. And then I rappelled off a cliff with the actual kelp, and I had a backup rope, but it held me. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions. Was if your life is dependent on 550 cord, like have you ever rappelled off with?
Well, I have, but it wasn't because my life was dependent on it. It's because an old Master Chief from Vietnam made me rappel off a building with it, with just my belt buckle, and I was like, "This doesn't." He's like, "Do it, boy." I was like, "You're the Master Chief." And so, yeah, it's a little hard to break with 550 cord. Diameter of the rope's really important, and it certainly was almost melted all the way through by the time I got to the bottom. So I've done a 3-story building with 550 cord. I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
It's
good to know.
Yeah, I think in his heart, he was just letting me know it can be done. See, I told you. You're like, I don't know if it's repeatable, but yes, I did it once.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, thanks for sharing that tip. And this has been another episode of The Warrior's Walk. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the biggest compliments you can give us if you're enjoying our content is to share with other people. So make sure you hit that share button. Let other people know about our content so that they can enjoy it as well. So see you next time.